The smoke of Satan.
Hello, and welcome to The Smoke of Satan. My name is Joseph Solo Jr. I'm the writer of edgy Catholic fiction. I've written books, When the Wood is Dry, an edgy Catholic thriller, Falling Prophet, my graphic novel and comic book series, and Merry Friggin' Christmas, an edgy Christmas comedy, which comes in a naughty version, and the naughty edition, and the standard edition. And then standard edition has less bad language, basically. It's about a PG-13 in the standard division, a little bit worse than the naughty one. Okay? And When the Wood is Dry also comes in a Catholic edition. So this is episode 6 of The Smoke of Satan, where we're going to be talking about Dogma and the Sacraments. And again, Smoke of Satan comes from a quote from Pope Paul VI back in about 1971 or so. So it was after the Vatican II and after the new Mass. And he said, "We would say that through some mysterious crack, no, it's not mysterious, through some crack, the smoke of Satan has entered the Church of God. There is doubt, uncertainty, problems, unrest, dissatisfaction, and confrontation." So yeah, my thinking is that this smoke of Satan has to do with something called the Modernist Heresy, which Pope Pius X was confronting in his papacy, and when he wrote this Encyclical called Pascendi Dominici Gregis, which is about the Modernist Heresy, and he took a lot of steps to try to limit the extent of this heresy in the Church, which no longer are around since Vatican II. Okay? So what he was fighting against, we're not really fighting against anymore. At least it's not an open battle. Okay? It's in our seminaries, among our priests. They're being educated in this new way of thinking that happened in the 60s. And my thinking is we got to fight this battle again. We got to get back to what Pope Pius X was worried about, and he was very worried, and he took a lot of steps to try to confront this. Okay, so let's talk about dogma and the sacraments. But first, let's remind you about traditional theology. Okay, Thomas Aquinas took what the Greeks did with philosophy. The Greeks believed that, we learn things through our senses, by our reason, that gives us knowledge. We have our natural end, which is death. They reasoned that there is one God, and that God should reveal himself. This is all through reason alone. Now, St. Thomas added to this the idea that God reveals himself, and that's another source of knowledge. It's directly from God, from supernatural revelation. So we have this order of grace, which is faith, and he added that in. Now, the modernist thinkers said we don't really need that extra thing there. We don't need that revelation directly from God. We experience everything directly from our senses. We believe that grace perfects nature and faith is the perfection of reason. So we don't need this extra order of grace. And they did something they called ressourcement. They went back and they resourced everything from the original documents, but they read it through this new lens where, there's no real external revelation of God. It's all internal inside of the person. And it's a more agnostic approach. And you start with agnosticism, you end with pantheism. Maybe you end where you started with agnosticism, but you don't end up Catholic. You don't end up with what St. Thomas believed. Okay? So let's talk a little bit now about dogma and the sacraments from the modernist perspective, which I want you to understand is not good. That's why I'm reminding you about traditional theology, because it's not really what I would like you to believe. I'd rather you believe what St. Thomas believed, the great doctor of the church. Okay, so here is what the modernists think about dogma, in particular, to start. Okay? So dogma starts with some kind of an impulse or a necessity, a primitive formula. And this primitive formula, then, we elaborate in our minds, and we elaborate it, and then we get some secondary formulas, and we flesh this thing out in our own head. And then we make a doctrinal construction out of this. And we got something that we think is really good, and finally it gets the attention of the magisterium, and the magisterium evaluates this and says, is this in the common consciousness? And if it's in the common consciousness, then the magisterium declares this is dogma. Now, that is not what we thought about dogma right up until 1960 or so. Well, people started thinking this way before 1960, and we kind of surrendered to it officially in the church in the 1960s in Vatican II. That's not what we used to think about where dogma came from. We thought there was a truth, right? And we declared that as a dogma. We didn't declare it a dogma because we kept elaborating in our minds, and we kind of figured it out and said, well, this is it, right? So this is not consistent with what the church was thinking for over 1900 years. But all of a sudden, we kind of changed, and because this is accepted kind of a lot in our seminaries and things. Not everybody accepts it. There's still some arguments about it, but the mainstream of the thinking in Vatican II was consistent with this, which is inconsistent with what our tradition had given us and the faith that had been handed down to us through the apostles. Okay, so here's another thing he said. Born of the species of impulse or necessity by virtue of which the believer is constrained to elaborate his religious thought, primitive formula, so as to render it clearer for himself and for others. Okay? So you get the idea. It's this impulse causes us to elaborate some kind of a thought in our heads. And that's how we end up with dogma. Okay, let's take a look at what Pope Pius X said about this. Okay, dogma is to be carefully distinguished from the speculations of theologians, which, although not alive with the life of dogma, are not without their utility as serving to harmonize religion with science and remove opposition between the two in such a way as to throw light from without on religion, and it may be even to prepare the matter for future dogma. Okay, so they're making a distinguishment here between the dogma and speculations of theologians, although those speculations may lay the foundation for future dogma. No, that's not how it works. And this is Pius X describing their beliefs. This isn't what Pius X believes, okay? So he goes on and says, concerning worship, there would not be much to be said were it not that under this head are comprised the sacraments, concerning which the modernists fall into the gravest errors. Okay, so when you apply this thinking to the sacraments, you come up with something where the sacraments are just symbolic. They're things we iterated, elaborated until they seemed good to us, and then they were part of the cosmic unconsciousness here. The common consciousness. Cosmic unconsciousness is from an old movie in the 1980s called The Repo Man. And there was this guy who was a character who talked about something being part of the cosmic unconsciousness. And I'm confusing the things in my mind here. It's the common consciousness, okay? All right. Anyway, so he goes on. That's his transition into talking about the sacraments. So what do they believe about the sacraments? For them, the sacraments are the resultant of a double need. For as we have seen, everything in their system is explained by inner impulses or necessities. And here he gives two needs, right? So we have a need to give some sensible manifestation to religion, and we have a need to propagate it. So sacraments are mere symbols or signs, but they're not devoid of a certain efficacy. Okay, they are a vehicle for the diffusion of certain great ideas which strike the public mind. Now, so they're evaluating sacraments based on their utility, right? They're good for something, so that's why we have them. Now, that's not what we believe, that Jesus instituted the sacraments. You know, he said, "Do this in remembrance of me." When he said, "This is my body and this is my blood," right? Yeah. And he said, if you forgive sins, they're forgiven, and if you withhold them, they're withheld. And he instituted the sacrament of penance, right? So this idea is foreign to what we believed for 1900 years. So now they're going back and saying, well, really, we're smarter than that. We know kind of this is how it really worked. And they aren't smarter than that. And this isn't how it really worked. So let's hear what Pope Pius X had to say about this, okay? What the phrases are to ideas, that the sacraments are to the religious sentiment, that and nothing more. The modernists would be speaking more clearly were they to affirm that the sacraments are instituted solely to foster the faith. But this is condemned by the Council of Trent. If anyone say that these sacraments are instituted solely to foster the faith, let him be anathema. Now, an anathema is a curse, okay? So let him be cursed if they believe that. Now, what Pius X is saying here is that they don't come right out and say this because they know that the Council of Trent has forbidden them to say that. But this is what they actually believe, right? So this is when you sum up what they believe. They're saying that these things are symbols, they're manifestations that foster the faith, they have some efficacy in doing that. Yeah, so they're kind of good. But that's anathema. You can't do that. Okay? So that is today's talk on the dogma and the sacraments. And our next episode is episode 7, which will be the Holy Scriptures and the Church. And we'll see what the modernists have to say about that as Pope Pius X continues to go through his understanding of what this heresy is that he's fighting against. And he does very much believe he's in a fight. And I think we got to renew the battle. We got to raise the standard of this fight again and get some of this bad thinking out of our church and get back to what we believed for over 1900 years with St. Thomas Aquinas. Well, St. Thomas Aquinas elaborated it in, I don't know, what was he, like the 1200s or something. So, I mean, but you get the idea. Before that, we didn't believe what these guys are saying. You know, you don't get past that. You know, St. Thomas Aquinas was consistent with what was believed in the past. And this is not. That's the problem with it. It's a discontinuity with what we believed for over 1900 years. Okay, again, my name is Joseph Silla Jr. My books are When the Wood is Dry, an edgy Catholic thriller. Blind Prophet is a comic book and graphic novel. And Merry Friggin' Christmas is my Christmas book. It's a story about an atheist at Christmas time, which I think you would enjoy. If you want the naughty version, you can go for that, or you can go with the standard version. And again, a lot of these books are free. So the e-books, the e-book for Merry Friggin' Christmas, the standard version, is free, and the e-book for When the Wood is Dry, even the Catholic edition, is free, and the first episode of my comic book, which is A Prophet is Born, that's free as well. So you can get a taste for what my writing is for nothing, okay? I'm not making a lot of money on this stuff. I'm trying to do something I think is important, okay? Again, my name is Joseph Silla Jr., and we will see you next time on The Smoke of Satan when we will talk about the Holy Scriptures and the Church. God bless.